U.S. Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling in the challenge to a New York gun law.
The Supreme Court will be taking up a gun rights case.
While media outlets fixated on political theater and trending controversies, 9 Supreme Court justices unanimously delivered a ruling so consequential that it fundamentally alters the relationship between citizens and law enforcement across every state in the nation. This wasn't about parsing obscure legal technicalities or adjusting minor procedural rules. This decision directly transforms how every single American, particularly those who legally own and carry firearms, may be treated during any encounter with police officers. The implications are staggering, yet most people have no idea this just happened. The case is called Barnes versus Felix, and at its heart lies a tragedy. But what the Supreme Court decided extends far beyond that single incident. For the first time in decades, the justices explicitly rejected the restrictive framework that lower courts had been using and replaced it with a standard that demands complete context and genuine accountability. From routine traffic stops to someone knocking on your door, the way your actions and the actions of law enforcement are evaluated has just changed nationwide. Let's break down exactly what the court ruled and why it matters to every person who values their constitutional protections. The facts are straightforward but devastating. In Texas, Officer Robert Felix Jr. pulled over Ashton Barnes for suspected traffic violations. Felix ordered Barnes to exit the vehicle. Barnes opened the door and appeared to comply, then suddenly attempted to drive away. In that split second, Felix stepped onto the open driver's side door frame as the car began moving forward. Approximately 2 seconds later, Felix fired 2 rounds into the vehicle. Barnes was struck by gunfire and later died from his injuries.
Don't fucking move! Don't fucking move! Shots fired!
The entire critical sequence, from door opening to shots fired, lasted about 5 seconds. Barnes's mother filed a civil lawsuit alleging excessive force and violation of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable seizure. The district court ruled in favor of the officer, applying a doctrine the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had used repeatedly: the moment of threat rule. This approach instructs courts to evaluate only the precise instant when force was deployed. If the officer reasonably perceived a deadly threat at that exact moment, the force is deemed constitutional. Everything that happened before that moment, all the events leading up to it, are treated as legally irrelevant. The Fifth Circuit affirmed this narrow view, focusing exclusively on the 2 seconds when Felix clung to a moving vehicle. They concluded that a reasonable officer could fear being thrown from the car, run over, or dragged beneath it. Through that restricted lens, the shooting appeared lawful. Then the Supreme Court accepted the case and unanimously declared that lens far too narrow. The opinion, authored by Justice Elena Kagan, establishes that claims of excessive force during a stop or arrest must be evaluated by examining the totality of circumstances from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. That analysis is not confined by an artificial time constraint. Courts may and must consider earlier facts that provide meaning to those final seconds. They can examine whether the officer's prior choices unnecessarily escalated the risk, as well as what the suspect did or failed to do. In straightforward terms, the Constitution demands context, not a cropped photograph frozen in time. The moment of threat doctrine gained traction for understandable reasons. Use of force situations often hinge on instantaneous decisions. Courts were appropriately reluctant to second-guess split-second judgments with the comfortable benefit of hindsight, so they narrowed their analysis to what the officer reasonably perceived at the final moment. The intention wasn't problematic. The problem was the blindness that resulted. By systematically ignoring everything that came before, the law sometimes excused avoidable danger. If an officer's earlier decisions cornered everyone involved into a deadly confrontation, poor positioning, failure to wait for backup, commands that were unclear or contradictory, those choices simply vanished from the legal equation. The final snapshot could appear justified even when the complete sequence revealed it never had to happen that way. This is precisely why families and civil liberties advocates have pointed to case after case where someone who posed no genuine threat ended up dead after a cascade of misunderstandings. Consider Stephon Clark in Sacramento. A vandalism call, a backyard pursuit, a cell phone mistaken for a firearm. Whether better lighting, greater distance, or different tactics could have changed that outcome was treated as irrelevant under the narrow rule. Or Oscar Grant at Oakland's Fruitvale Station on New Year's Day, 2009. Not a patrol shooting in the traditional sense, but a transit police use of force that raised profound questions about training, escalation, and accountability. Grant was shot while lying prone on a platform. The officer claimed he intended to deploy a taser. The case became emblematic in California of how seconds can define and end a lifetime. Or Sean Monterosa in Vallejo. The decision to fire through a windshield from a moving vehicle intensified scrutiny of pre-shooting decisions. Under a narrow moment test, only the final perceived hand movement mattered. Under a totality test, tactics and risk creation can be weighed as well. Courts needed a standard that filtered out unrealistic hindsight bias while still permitting cause and effect to be examined. That's exactly what the Supreme Court just restored. The Barnes opinion doesn't invent revolutionary new doctrine. It revives the classic Fourth Amendment inquiry. Objective reasonableness in light of all facts known to a reasonable officer, considering the totality of circumstances. The court makes three pivotal clarifications that now govern use of force analysis nationwide. First, no artificial time constraints. The inquiry may include earlier conduct that helps explain the final moments, prior commands given, tactical positioning, information received via radio, the suspect's degree of compliance or confusion, the presence of bystanders, and the availability of safer alternatives. Courts are not restricted to analyzing the last eye blink. Second, no perfect hindsight. Judges cannot micromanage tactical choices with the luxury of slow motion replay. The standard remains what a reasonable officer at the scene would have perceived and done given the information available at that time. Third, causation flows both ways. If prior choices by an officer unreasonably created the danger that necessitated force, that's relevant. If prior conduct by the suspect reasonably signaled lethal risk, that's equally relevant. The scale must weigh everything. Justice Kagan writes that earlier facts may illuminate why ambiguous conduct appeared threatening or harmless. That sentence is the beating heart of this opinion. It recognizes that lawful behavior by citizens, especially those legally carrying firearms, can be catastrophically misread in a fraction of a second, and that courts must account for the lawfulness of those actions when judging the officer's response. Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence, joined by Justices Thomas, Barrett, and Alito, emphasizes the other perspective. Traffic stops are inherently dangerous, suspects sometimes flee, situations can turn lethal for officers and the public in an instant. Courts must continue protecting officers from unrealistic expectations. The concurrence doesn't narrow the rule. It reminds everyone that reasonableness remains the fundamental touchstone. Taken together, these perspectives deliver a balanced command to lower courts. Look broadly, think fairly, judge in the real world. Here's the connection that armed citizens must understand. Over the past decade, countless routine police encounters have involved lawful firearms, concealed carry disclosures during traffic stops, open carry in states that permit it, home visits related to red flag petitions, and investigations where a citizen is simultaneously the reporter and the armed defender. Many tragedies have begun with a lawful movement that appeared threatening to an officer primed for danger. Under the narrow moment of threat rule, the person's lawful status and prior compliance could be completely erased by that final instant. Under the totality rule, those facts must be considered. Imagine you're stopped for a minor traffic violation. You immediately inform the officer, as state law requires, that you have a concealed carry permit and you're armed at your right hip. The officer, distracted by radio traffic about a nearby armed robbery, misinterprets your reach for your license as a threatening gesture and fires. Under the old Barnes standard, the court would examine whether the officer's awareness of your lawful carry status matters. It would consider your clear verbal disclosure, the officer's prior knowledge from dispatch, whether the officer provided explicit instructions about retrieving documents, and your compliance with state disclosure requirements. This doesn't automatically render the shooting unlawful, but it prevents your lawful disclosure and compliance from being erased in court. For enforcement of red flag laws, this ruling fundamentally changes the calculation. Officers serving firearm seizure orders must now anticipate that pre-force planning, including time of day, method of approach, and communication, will be scrutinized in court. Sloppy or unnecessarily aggressive execution that triggers avoidable escalation will no longer be invisible. This decision binds every federal court in the United States. For decades, the Fifth Circuit and several others operated under moment of threat tunnel vision. That ends immediately. Lower courts must reopen their analytical framework. Judges who previously ruled in minutes on qualified immunity motions will now have to examine more evidence, review more body camera footage, and consider pre-force decisions as integral parts of the reasonableness analysis. Consider a real-world impact scenario. Imagine a case in Dallas where an officer shoots a driver after a brief pursuit. Under the old rule, only the final second, the driver reaching under the seat, would matter. Under the new rule, if video evidence shows the officer initiated the stop in a manner that cornered the driver without backup, escalated the situation with rapid overlapping commands, and failed to verify what was in the suspect's hands before firing, all those details must be weighed. This makes it far more likely that cases will proceed to jury trials instead of being dismissed at summary judgment. This isn't theoretical speculation. Federal appellate courts will have to revisit precedents they've relied upon for years. Plaintiffs' attorneys are already filing motions to reconsider excessive force cases that were dismissed under the narrow test. Some judges will resist, but the Supreme Court's unanimous 9-0 decision makes it unequivocally clear. Failure to apply the totality standard constitutes grounds for reversal. Even police union attorneys are retooling their defense strategies because they now must address earlier decision-making documented in officer reports, not just the final moments. This means training protocols will change as well, because departments understand that every choice leading to a shooting is now admissible evidence in judging reasonableness. California has become ground zero for debates about policing and constitutional rights. Let's examine two high-profile incidents through the Barnes framework. First, Stephon Clark in Sacramento, 2018. Police responded to reports of someone breaking car windows. They pursued Clark into his grandmother's backyard. Body camera footage showed officers issuing commands in darkness, then firing 20 rounds when they believed Clark pointed a weapon. It was a cell phone. Under the old rule analysis, at the moment of threat, the instant they observed the object in Clark's hand, their belief it was a firearm could be deemed reasonable, potentially ending the case. Under Barnes' analysis, courts must now evaluate whether officers properly identified themselves, used lighting effectively, took positions that minimized misinterpretation, and gave Clark a fair opportunity to comply. The totality could reveal that earlier tactical choices created a false sense of imminent danger. Second, Sean Monterosa in Vallejo, 2020. During civil unrest, police responded to suspected looting. Monterosa was outside a store, allegedly kneeling with hands near his waistband. An officer still inside a moving, unmarked police vehicle fired 5 shots through the windshield, killing him. No firearm was recovered, only a hammer in his pocket. Under the old rule, the moment of threat would freeze on Monterosa's hand movement, allowing the claim of perceived danger to dominate. Under Barnes' analysis, courts must now consider whether firing from a moving vehicle without clear identification increased the likelihood of misinterpretation, and whether stopping to issue commands could have reduced risk. Pre-force tactical decisions are now squarely admissible. Both cases under Barnes would receive significantly deeper factual review. For California, where many police encounters face intense scrutiny, this means more cases will survive dismissal motions and proceed to trial. The intersection between the Second and Fourth Amendments has never been more critical. Every year, thousands of gun owners are involved in police encounters, from routine traffic stops to high-tension emergency responses. In many states, you're legally required to disclose that you're armed. The very act of disclosure can trigger a chain reaction. Under the old rule, if the encounter ended in a mistaken shooting, courts examined only the final perceived movement. Under the new rule, the officer's awareness of your lawful carry status, your compliance with disclosure laws, and the clarity of commands will all be considered as essential context. The Barnes decision makes one thing crystal clear: documentation has become paramount. For law enforcement, this means body cameras must be activated earlier in encounters to capture pre-force events. Reports must detail why specific tactics were chosen, not merely what occurred in the final seconds. Training must emphasize de-escalation and unambiguous commands, knowing these will be replayed and analyzed in court. For citizens, especially armed citizens, this means recording encounters where legal, clearly stating intentions on camera, and avoiding ambiguous movements during high-stress interactions. Imagine a scenario. In Los Angeles County, a deputy encounters a legally armed homeowner responding to a noise in the yard at night. The homeowner's security camera captures the deputy, failing to announce himself before shining a flashlight and drawing his weapon. A tense moment follows. Under the old rule, only the homeowner's final movement might matter. Under Barnes, the deputy's lack of announcement and approach methodology are critical context. Evidence is no longer just about the shot, it's about the entire story leading to it. If you're a gun owner, disclose early and clearly if required by law. Narrate your actions aloud. I am moving my left hand to my wallet. Avoid sudden movements. Keep hands visible unless instructed otherwise, and know your state's specific legal requirements. If you're in law enforcement, consider how your choices in the first minute will appear in court. Provide clear and unambiguous commands, avoid overlapping orders with partners, and use lighting, positioning, and time to your advantage before force becomes necessary. The Barnes versus Felix decision is far more than a legal adjustment. It's a fundamental reminder that the Constitution protects people, not merely isolated moments frozen in time. For gun owners, it means the law must examine the complete picture, not just a single second that can erase your rights and potentially your life. California, Texas, Ohio, every state will feel this ruling's impact. Cases that would have been summarily dismissed will now see the inside of courtrooms. Officers will adapt their approaches, citizens will adapt their awareness, and the national conversation about force, rights, and responsibility will evolve. This ruling provides something invaluable: context, the most powerful element in any court of law.